Uh, Uh, can we? Can I start this script? Okay, there it is. Yeah. Uh, why am I so tiny on the screen? Anyways, I guess it's part of the experience or something like that. Uh, also, why is the microphone like low or am I losing it? Is is my posture or something like that the problem? Do I have it I guess it will unavoidably peak, but it's also part of the idea. Test. Yeah, okay. It works, I guess. Give me a second. Let me see. How do I? Why is it lying? Why is it lying? Okay. It works. Does it work better? Let me see. It's supposedly on its best capacity. What is actually wrong? Uh, test. Should be fine, right? Am I losing it? It sounds. It sounds fair enough, I guess. That's more than good for me. Also, is the bot not working or something like that? Why was there no message? Like always, like, oh wow, yeah, the stream has started, you know? I don't really know why it even says that on chat, but yeah, it's nice to have the volume is actually low. Why is it low anyways? I will assume that I am the problem. Yeah, I was partially the problem. Why is there no category? Why do I see no category? Better question. We are in a category? Yeah, we are in a category. Why do I not see a category then? Anyways, I guess it happens. What am I missing now? Yeah, everything else. Okay, everything is ready. So we have like a minute and a half. Yet, why is it not? No, it's actually not working. Why? Can I know why? I have one final place to look at. Audio mixer. Default audio mixer. Is the answer there? Is the golden chalice there? Recording, indeed. The microphone? Can I qualities? Yeah. Why is it low? Why is it actually low? It's like 70% for some reason. Yeah, unavoidably it's not going to work. If let me see. Okay, around here I guess. No, that's too loud. Around here it works. Okay. I have I have 30 seconds, but at the same time I wait. Just cultivate your patience, I guess. Thank you. here we are. I am just a minute late and I am not ready. I forgot to plug the mouse. Wow. Okay, biggest change in history. Now it works. Something else to say? No, I don't know. Let me actually. Okay, there it is. Good evening. Welcome. Why? Why? Give me a second. I'm not moving for some reason. You know, it's not that hard to have a working PNC. Why is it not working in this case? It's reading something, but it's not reading the mic. What is this thing reading? If it isn't, okay, there it is, there it is. It wasn't, for some reason, the mic that it was picking up wasn't the mic itself, but at the same time, it was the mic. I don't know. Anyways, now I don't exist. Thank you. Okay, good evening. Here we are. A little bit on time, no. But the point is not that actually. The point is that we get to be here at all, I guess. It has been quite a little bit since the last time. How long? Sunday? Monday? Only 2 days or so, supposedly. Plus, there was this whole stuff that I don't know. Nothing actually happened of importance, as always, through that time. So we are fine. I don't know what's an actually important event. I don't I don't hope to have to come here and announce something like, oh yeah, we entered in the Third World War. That's for sure important, but I hope it doesn't happen. I guess, but no. Anyways, the point is, good evening. Um, Today we are once again congregated for talking about the stuff, thinking about the stuff, something along those lines, basically. And yeah, uh, I think that I found I did something. I tried to do something that was to announce with some what is it, previousness, some with anticipation. That's the proper word. Preemptively decide what is it that we're going to be talking about, and that was certainly a challenge. I have to say something that yeah, I wasn't really thinking about it in that one particular sense, but something fun is that we, at least personally, by having to think about my week, I find that it sort of feels a lot longer. There are so many more things to go through once you actually organize yourself. So it's something akin to, I don't know, the endless amount of things that have to happen throughout existence makes it feel much, not exactly distance. I don't think it is something about distance. It's just a lot more heavy in terms of, oh yeah, this thing is over. Let's say like this. Today, my day has finished because I did everything that I wanted to. Okay, that's easy enough. I might find a moment in which I am just without any other desire about anything. Yeah, that's easy. But if I have decided previously what I will have to do actually throughout my day, what happens then is instead I realize that, wow, I might have demanded from myself quite a lot. And not in terms of, oh wow, yeah, this is so tiresome, this is so, I'm dying, the world is such a heavy pressure on my, no. It's more along the lines of just, well, you know, because there are so many things to always be doing, it's surprising to see that so many things get accomplished in such a short amount of time. That's where I think I derived a feeling of, yeah, it's just a Tuesday, what would in many other weeks be the very beginning of the week for us. It isn't actually that, it's more along the lines of, I feel like it's almost Thursday, it's something along the lines of, wow, time certainly feels to be moving a lot slower when we are engaged in reality. But yeah, anyways, that's, I guess, a little bit besides the point. Thank you. I just wanted to say that because, or this was sort of being brought up in relation with, and yeah, something funny has been the realization that, yeah, actually, because we find ourselves here trying or having already tried and decided what is it that we are going to be talking about, particularly in this instance, something very funny happens, and that is most of the ideas get to be, to some degree, thought about. I would say possibly in the best reality, not just by what, yeah, in a one-sided mode, but yeah, it's a seed that gets to sprout into much more once it stops being just a matter of patience and it actually moves into a thing of slow continuous actions, not just, let's say like this, patience not as in just waiting for things to happen without any actual input from anything else, sort of letting it happen based on luck rather than the needed wait time, because unavoidably, I guess, I don't know, in a parallel, you cannot go the first day to the gym and, I guess, bench thrice your own weight normally, so you need to actually slowly get better and better. Same thing here. It's something along the lines of, wow, it does feel a lot more. I wouldn't say disciplined. It's something different. Yeah, I cannot really name it exactly by the proper definition, but something along those lines, I guess. But anyways, uh, sorry. The point is, why are we here for? What are the reasons that have us here today? Um, I don't think that we actually have that much to discuss. In a certain sense, I I think it is always a funny consideration, mostly for all of those things that are related to ideas that might be somewhat apparent once you have, let's say, delved yourself in those aspects of existence. But I don't know. I guess, not to say it in an insulting manner, but yeah, if we have not explored the world so much and we have just decided to focus on ourselves, then ideas such as what power constitutes and what any kind of drug, as it is the other topic of today, might signify or might be used for, becomes a lot harder to actually think for the first time, but it isn't in itself such an strange concept or such a distant and impossible to absorb idea. I think so. So, I don't know. We have to see. We have yet to actually discuss them. It's just a preface. Those are the two things. And yeah, I I do think unavoidably there are always interesting things to say, more so in terms of, oh yeah, both of these topics or these concepts in themselves still occupy a very huge place in our current society, so to speak. So, unavoidably, if we ever want to get towards any revelation of sorts, and if we ever want to more so be capable of addressing those potentially interesting issues that arise from the present concepts that arise out of these initial stages of ideas, it's necessary to unavoidably have first and foremost explored the basic grounds, so to speak. But at the same time, I don't really think it's something that we could actually sprout here. No, not in terms of, oh, well, yeah, nobody can take any kind of lesson out of this. It's more along the lines of just, you know, as always, discourses don't have the necessity to always be, I guess, reactionary or creator of other discourses. It's useful to also sometimes stay in the most basic level of just, let's say it like this, delineating stuff. And more so also it's a good reminder about what is it that we are exploring sometimes, or where is it that we are standing. Mostly because unavoidably there is this funny category of I have forgotten about this stuff. I have already thought about this before. Let's say it like this. I don't know. Because of my personal situations and such, I might have already utilized some time to try and think about any idea of this same order in the last 10 years. At some point, I did think about them, but at the same time, I never reached such a conclusive final thought to wrap everything up. So it also serves me to go back and sort of revisit what are not just institutions in themselves, but also what are what I would have assumed completely settled ideas. After all, it's useful once again to see where not everything is so solid. Mostly because I guess, yeah, it's part of the project of anybody who aspires to, I wouldn't say greatness, happiness. Probably it's the easiest way to declare it as. Yeah, indeed, I have still to keep on doing this eternal back and forth between seeing what I have already tried to see before, realizing that I haven't really seen anything, or that I haven't really seen everything that it has to offer, the idea. And from that point onwards, having then finally fixed that and allowed myself to give it a more in depth explanation for everything. After all, I guess it is sort of controversial, even more so for, let's say, someone who hasn't explored things in such deepness. But yeah, most thoughts can have sufficient enough points of development so that we don't have to worry ourselves with that sensation of, okay, yeah, this thing doesn't make any sense, or this thing is not at all something that I can utilize for myself. So yeah, that's more still on the, I guess, development of the, what is it, of the epistemology behind the necessity for exploring stuff of this sort. Not actually exploring anything yet, but still, to some degree, delineating such stuff is as much as the action itself of doing it useful. It's that idea of sometimes I forget that actually things serve me in any way. Sometimes I don't know. I get accustomed to just thinking about the stuff without actually realizing why am I doing it. And I guess main principle of, I would say, psychology in general, I guess, or something along those lines. I can realize that I do not have enough consciousness over what I am doing. Thus, I allow myself to fall onto not so useful behaviors because I do not analyze myself properly enough in that same sense. So, I guess that's the reason. Anyways, let me now for real. Let me drink something, and after that we will actually start. Okay. What what did we have in store today? Supposedly we only have two things to mainly talk about. The first one being power, and that is I think so. It is the easiest one to some degree. When I was trying to think about it in terms of how do we present that, something very funny that happens is we end up realizing, luckily enough, at least the idea itself of power is something that has been greatly explored, once again in depth already, detailed in many other philosophical treatises, so to speak. So we can, more than anything else, just run from conclusion to conclusion without actually having to spend so much time creating those whole arguments to find anything. Unavoidably clear issue with that is, by not slowly constructing the arguments, the possibility of not realizing why some conclusions ought to not be taken as such utterly serious conclusions becomes possible, but at the same time, it's also along the lines of, I don't know, man. I don't say it every single time. I don't think it is necessary to say that. You shouldn't be doubting everything in terms of, I shouldn't be needing to tell you that you shouldn't be doubting everything that you hear for the sake of reaching a deeper understanding. It's a sort of implicit mode of behaving. That one of, yes, sometimes I hear something that doesn't make absolute sense, and I have the possibility of, instead of just taking what I have heard as an utter truth and living the rest of my life with that, I go and instead see what is the actual proper idea behind that. What is the actual proper mode of, to some degree, thinking out that stuff and such. And yeah, in this case, it's the same. Unavoidably, the conclusions themselves, even more because they sound so good, are not, even so, are not to be taken completely as true statements. I am not somebody who makes true statements and nothing else. I haven't really known a human who has that capacity, and it will be incredibly demental to say, yeah, today we're going to be talking about this stuff in the most objective way possible. It doesn't happen, brother. So yeah, anyways, starting power. What is actual power? I don't know. Besides the most basic mean of, wow, yeah, power was that demon girl from this one anime slash manga, we have power as another thing. The real power is a far more complicated idea in some ways, far more understandable because it's not something so humanized to some degree. It is something that we do talk about a lot and that we seem to assume that is easy enough to deal with, but at the same time, it is not something that we utterly possess in itself. There is, okay, let me say like this, something very funny that we can say when we try to first and foremost define power is we can pretty easily utilize this category of realness, that we are borrowing that from from some, yeah, psychoanalytical schools of those things which, inside of the category of realness, everything that might not be utterly mentionable by its own essence, but rather by the ways in which we understand it, it is that we refer to as the real things. The issue is power in itself is one of those. At a glance, or in a proper mode of observation, we can realize it is one of those things which is the most real to some degree, because everybody is in aspirations towards that to some level, even if we do not categorize the different types of power as the same thing. All, all the human struggles might be aimed towards these diverse modes of possessing any kind of power, which might in the end give the person any kind of, I wouldn't just define it as satisfaction, but rather as realization in terms of the acquisition of the desire itself, let's say. So, yes, power is sadly something not exactly complex. It is just that thing which we are always dreaming of having, and which the more we try to possess, the more we realize at the same time that we cannot fully have, because while in a first level there is this definition, more basic definition even, of pleasure and anything that has to deal with those good sensations that anybody gets to have, which might be more than anything centered around the self, so to speak, around what I feel and what I am and my ownness and nothing else. Okay, power is that thing which enters or allows me to enter into communication with the rest of the world. That thing which I personally always have a certain level of a struggle with in terms of discussing, because I don't really like to separate between just me and the rest of the world, and mostly create that barrier of, oh wow, yeah, yeah, I am me, then the rest of the world is that. And because I separate things in that way, I don't have to have so much responsibility over myself and the world. The world shouldn't be imposing so much of its own will onto myself, you know? Okay, that or those type of allegations aside, in its essence, power is the proper carrier of discourse between me and anything that might not be me, so to speak. That's the most basic manner of defining it. It is easy enough as if we get to understand what it means. It is a simple enough and practical definition so that we don't have to worry so much about trying then to realize in which areas particularly the present human being discusses power, but it is in the act of observing how power functions that we end up seeing, yeah, not sadly, it's just truly, power is a much more diverse thing than what we would, if we haven't analyzed it before, we will have said. Because why? Mainstream discourse encapsulates power as, oh yeah, anybody who is in a position of power understands and has power, and anybody who isn't does not have access to that, and that's the whole equation, let's say. And the best examples are, okay, you have the armies, you have your president, you have leaders of very big organizations, be it criminal or not, even, and such types of powers. Okay, true that they are some types of power, but in themselves, those are further levels of analysis of what might be the different social powers that do exist. It is not that I am saying that they don't exist. Please, that be certified power, more complex forms of power do exist, but we're not referring to those ones yet. In that sense, once again, we're just tracing back to what is the thing which I can have or unavoidably not have, and therefore suffer because I don't have, or be unable of doing certain things because I don't have it, which allows me then to do other stuff in relation to others, while I get to do what I want with my own self very easily because there is no necessity to exercise any kind of or enforce any kind of will onto anything else. power is what allows me to then finally demonstrate to the rest of the world what is it that I actually have an interest on, and also it is the different methods through which I get to acquire my object of desire itself. And in that particular sentence, there is also sort of an already existing tiny gem. It is a very sudden but obvious realization, the moment in which you have already dealt with all of that. It is not completely true also that power is only in relation to others. There is this method of understanding, I guess, depending on the schools that you visit, it has to deal with the restructuralization of the mind and whatnot. Anything that has to deal with the recognition of those areas of my own self in which I do not get to have so much control. In some ways, not always, but in some ways, we can equate power to control, because that is when we realize that we get to have or slowly possess more power over different areas of ourselves that before we didn't get to, because mostly they were relinquished to very obscure and abandoned areas of what is still my person, but what is at the same time not something that I own, so to speak. So, once again, it is I wouldn't say nuanced in the term of, oh wow, yeah, it's such a deep observation. It's just an interesting realization that, yeah, power is also something that I get to have over myself. But it's so to sort of to make it easier to speak about, if or the moment in which you try to read any kind of psychology book, I guess, you will find that, yeah, power is also what we have to exercise when we are dealing with anything that might be in the realm of the unconscious, for example. That's the easiest mode of representing the concept itself. It's not just that which we utilize for or with everyone else. It is also something that we utilize even in ourselves, to have willpower enough to be capable of attaining, or yeah, obtaining, or desires of obtaining, or yeah, continuously working towards our dreams and such, is part of that self. It's not so much in relation to, oh yeah, I just forced everyone to do what I wanted. At the same time, I have also to force, quote unquote, myself to do stuff. And yeah, it is still part of power, but yet again, it is a little bit more of a hidden. Let's say like that. Let's define it as that. Hidden stem within the initial definition of, oh yeah, power is all, yeah, power is all of those things which I utilize to be in conversation, not just with myself, but also with everyone else. So yeah, it's in that level, it is that. Now, why are we even trying to talk about this? It is the question that we should have started with to some degree, but at the same time, it is not so much of a necessary question, because it is a much easier thing to properly harness once the definition of power in itself is given, because then it becomes unavoidable to just have to point out to what we have already said. Once you understand power, you understand the different power dynamics that exist in the whole world. And once you understand the power dynamics that exist not just in what are me or you in relation to others, but also me in relation to the other aspects of my own self, It is that then, yes, we get to see unavoidably, if I do not understand the power in such a way, I might as well not be capable of dealing with the world in a proper manner that allows me to, I guess in this case, my discourse is more than anything else centered around the idea of obtaining something. That thing which I guess at this point I have given 5 or 6 different names, be it desires, dreams, hopes, interest, whatever you want to define it as, yeah. The only vehicle for the capacity to obtain that is power. If there is no power, then there is no way to finally gratify, so to speak, that initial interest of ours. So yes, it's interesting, but it is still hard to fully solve in essence. Now, still, besides that, power. We haven't really moved that much from first level of definition. Power is then that which allows me to be in conversation with me and others. And unavoidably, we want to explore it because it allows us to realize how much we get to exist in the rest of the world, how much we get to exist anywhere, sort of, thanks to how we utilize it. Okay, in this case, the question then becomes first and foremost, what are the first instances of power that anybody can identify? Once again, we have already sort of pointed at some more complicated ones, those more abstract forms of power that I guess civilizations in themselves all arrive to. Okay, it is true that we have those. It's not that they don't exist, but at the same time, if we do not even understand the most basic ones, it becomes sort of impossible to really get the bigger picture in a proper manner. So, what are we talking about when we say that we have always had power in our hands? And why is it that we need to see those also as relations of power, so to speak? Because all of these things start always not just, I said before, not just with the rest and me, but also with my within my own self. Those aspects that at some point, let's say, have become me, but that were still not a part of my own person the first time I dealt with them in the most basic manner. Language is a certain type of power. It might as well, in depending on who you are talking to, or even myself, depending how much I am interested in delving into all of that, I might as well state stuff like, oh yeah, yeah, language is the most powerful thing that we possess and whatnot. Okay, yeah, true. But at the same time, it is the first sort of relationship that we establish with anything. Why? Because language is something that we get to harness, but at the same time, it is something that harnesses us. It is the thing which nests our consciousness to some degree because it defines the world that we see and it allows us. There is this whole concept of, once again, I have mentioned that power is what I utilize to see the rest of the world. Okay, in a very simple way, it is not just the power that I utilize, but it is also the types of representations that I create out of the real things, the ways in which I am capable of trying to approximate their true essence. Thus, I might stop talking about things as mere power, as well as how much I might stop talking about things just as words, because I realized that, yeah, they are then modes of modes of seeing, modes of observing the real things that do exist out there, but which are not the things that I am referring to, so to speak, but which are being referred to by the things which we can establish are the modes of representation of those real things, once again. So, without the whole wordplay there, it means that, yeah, the first, let's say like this, clarification is conscious relationship that we establish with power comes from the language. There is this previous level, which isn't so much of a conscious thing, it is sadly something relinquished, at least initially, to, to an instinctual mode of being and a more habituated, unconscious manner of solving things, and that is how we get to realize, to understand that there is this whole realm, not just of powers that are related to any type of language, but also, once again, physical power. Anything that has to do with physicality, with the physical capacities in itself, that one might as well precede, and in some instances even, the language, but still, sadly, in its most basic essence, it's something that I would say, we have harnessed. Everybody is capable of harnessing that, so that then everything else becomes be, becomes possibilitated, because if we do not harness our muscles, if we do not harness our mouths or body, and such, we are not capable of creating, understanding, reproducing, and such, anything that has to deal with language, which we have already tried to say was the first level of power. But it is because we do so from such an early age that we just interiorize those types of actions and those types of steps that lead us then to, yeah, a more defined and definite type of power. It is still, the once again, I said it in the sense of, luckily enough, because we realize that many things are a power, or are in the line of all, all that which we can classify as a power of sorts, then it becomes a possibility for us to revisit what they might be. It is that the physical prowess and the control, so to speak, that, or the way in which they have harnessed their physical prowesses, that a top athlete possesses, is much higher than that one. Yeah, than the one of an average person, which isn't capable of producing such good results in any aspect of their life. So, it is there that we can identify another sort of basic level of power. Then, I guess, um, it isn't incognito, it is more along the lines of way too complicated. Let's define it as that. It's better to say that it is way too complicated, at least for us right now, to define if it is that what comes actually first, the capacity to have physical or mental power and mental prowess, which one of the two, as in the eternal, was it the chicken or the egg that came first? Okay, same thing here. We shouldn't utilize so much time trying to discuss this one essence. I wouldn't even say At least based on what I have seen so far, I am pretty sure there is no definite answer still in many of the discussions that have to deal with all of these. Once you try to look at the history of the debate of what came first, did the human become more capable of thinking because they had enough tools, or did they create tools because they were far more capable of thinking than before? So we I don't think that it is a realistic goal, at least right now, for us to try and answer the eternal question of, wow, yeah, what came first? Was it the thought or the action? No clue, brother. Uh, I cannot, we cannot define that right now. I think it is something that can be at least analyzed properly enough so that it stops being such a deep question or such a huge, intriguing hole to always look at when you have to mention anything related to that, which is power. But at the same time, it isn't really life or death type of debate or anything like that. So, moving on, then we have those two types. Sorry. And with those two types, everything else comes sort of in consequence as a conclusion of that, due to time, thanks to them, and it is that, luckily enough, we slowly become more and more capable of not just what I stated before. We have not just power over ourselves, but also we end up realizing I exist, while also someone else exists, which is not me. Then I need to find ways of existing healthily with those other beings in a way in which we all get to be as satisfied as possible. The issue becomes, okay, how will I align myself with power? In its most basic definitions, you end up having something along the lines of, oh, wow, yeah, yeah, you can be a very thoughtful person who understands all interactions and who might be a little bit manipulative towards others because you utilize your brain capacities to always get what you want. So that you are a clever archetype, or your other archetype is the brute who always utilizes their strength. Then we have the mental power and the physical power. Okay, it is not that they are not so, but at the same time, they don't truly, at least in a more modern world, they don't apply as much. And you can identify those two structures in older societies. That's where something along the lines of anthropology comes in handy, when you realize, yeah, they do exist, but it is not in our current societies that they do exist. We can trace them back from those ancestors of ours, which were a lot less worried with more and more complicated ideas and associations of initial concepts, such as that one, all of them discussing and being in discourse with one another, but they are not exactly what we identify nowadays. You cannot really just because you are physically apt hit somebody and get everything that you want out of life, as the same as you cannot be an absolutely manipulative person because you also get sanctions imposed upon you. But I guess just at the least to mention them, unavoidably, anything that has to deal with all of those things, once again, resides in the realm of all that has to do with those institutionalized powers that we find out there, more so in the modern world, yes, but repeating that, we are not going to be focusing so much on that. It's not so necessary to look at what, I don't know, the school of, for example, sociologists and political philosophers has to say right now. Yes, they do exist, but no, they are not so necessary to have in mind in the most basic levels of power. What comes first is seeing the places in which they exist in our own life from their own, yes. We can worry about how the state utilizes its power and manipulates society, and society is also power, or through the power of the society, the rest of the state finds itself altered in ways in which both are being oppressed by one another, even if in unconscious. Yes, it's true that it happens, but it's not something that, if we don't have any other basis, we can understand. It's not a self-contained idea, so to speak. So yeah, moving on. Let me drink something and continue with this. Thus far, we have the most basic things. Yeah, we have the power which is mine mentally, and the power which is mine physically. From that, yes, many other further specifications and ways of subdividing them arise. It's not the same to be agile with math as to be emotionally intelligent, as to be clever enough with anything that has to do with health in the modern world. Like, it isn't the same to be agile than it is to be very strong, than it is to be just an, yeah, utterly fast person or flexible, which all reside in the realm of physicality. So, by slowly subdividing things, we start to see that, yeah, once again, all of those things refer to different types of power, and power is just the capacity to exert or control over stuff, which we might identify as something else besides us, or something pertaining to us that we were not as capable of controlling before. Not just possessing, but also properly utilizing. So yeah, let's say like this. Then the reality comes. It's a combination of the two in this case, because it is through, so to speak, my senses might be far more in the line of anything that has to do with physicality, along the lines of that. Yeah, we can have the discourses of what about drugs and reality altering drugs that might make us see different worlds than what we are seeing right now. Like, I don't know, psychoactive substances, easiest type of example. Anything that might alter what I see or what I hear and whatnot. Because then, if if my world gets altered by an external substance, it might not be such a physical experience, but this is another sort of tricky question, because in reality, something very funny that happens is, we, even nowadays, don't fully understand what things like the strongest types of psychoactive substances produce in us. how we can actually identify if they are truly only mental things or if there is truly something in the lines of the physical realms which we can access that are not accessible anywhere else if it isn't with that. So, ignoring it, yes, it is a combination of both physical and mental powers that give birth to this external thing, which is not just myself. With the internal language, we get to define everything, and with that, we get to identify that there is not an otherness that isn't just me. This otherness is the thing which I then try to deal with in different ways. Once again, we're not really even observing the goals, why power is the way in which it works, or why power seems to function as something useful or not. Power is just a very basic institution of sorts at this stage of existence. And we realize that, yeah, we can exert ourselves onto the rest. We get the realization that, yeah, wow, something exists out there, be it a physical or mental manifestation of something. Things are out there. And from there, I get to slowly not just want, but also actually modify things in the world and make them act in ways in which I feel better, so to speak. Is that actually useful? Yes. Is that actually noticeable? No. In many ways, once again, in many ways, the modern world does not discuss power at such basic levels. Mostly because I guess this is more of a political discourse, I guess, but yeah, there is a certain level of lack of awareness itself that allows somebody who doesn't possess the awareness about their powers to exert them. If you do not know, for example, let's say like this, if you are a children and you do not know that you need to tire yourself out so that you can get a proper night's sleep, it ends up meaning that you do not have so much of a proper control over your sleep schedule and how you get to rest properly. Then, if I never inform you of that, I might be capable of, by controlling when and under which situations you tire yourself out, gets to satisfy my own needs so that I get to be happy instead of you always doing what you want for your own sake. So it is a sort of complicated discussion, more so because, yeah, to which aspects does that apply? When does that mean something? And why should I be worrying about it? Because, oh wow, who isn't actually telling me about the powers that I have and the capacities that I possess? Those are questions that are way too complicated, at least for now, brother. So yeah, bear with me as we stay in the most basic realm today. But yeah, the point is, we have power over things. We realize that we have power over things, and then we realize that we have power over things that are not just ourselves, but that we could potentially. And huge, if you have to write it down, please add like 5 different borders to potentially we have the capacity to exert our power on those external things. It doesn't mean that we always do, it doesn't mean that we always can. I guess potentiality is not the same as power in itself. It's this idea. That's a far easier understanding. If you read, I think it is Plato who talks about that. It is not the same to have just an idea than to have the thing in itself exist. I guess I sort of did mention the realness of something. What is potential is not actually real, but everything that is real was at some point potential. The same thing here. If I have the potential to actually exert my power over something, it doesn't mean that I am actually doing it, nor that I even know that I can do that. It just means that it could happen. I just needed to devise how to do it, you know? And yeah, in this case, it happens that power is that thing which potentially exists between me, myself, and the rest, you know? So, having defined this much, which is still at the same time very basic, what's a proper step towards still very simple definitions? We have sort of already explained also that level of power which is pertaining to how some things control me. I guess it was mixed between that, suddenly, the other level of invisible or unrealized power over my own self. But yeah, the basic, the more basic form is the reality that there are other things exerting their power over my own existence, which once I recognize my own, I recognize also that it is being limited by the power of something else. And in this case, it is a more basic level of analysis. You can take it to the person becomes aware of their limitations once it enters in contact with the rest of the world. Why? Something funny that happens is the human has one of these many. You can find it in text as stuff along the lines of egos. Sorry, wounds to the ego. Okay, one of them, in this case, one of the parts of life that gives us awareness over the power of things in us is when we get to see a bird fly, we get to realize that we cannot actually fly, we get to understand, at least nowadays, thanks to also all the development of the sciences, I think this thing which is called gravity, once we get to understand time, once we get to understand that fourth dimension, we also get to understand the power of our own mortality, our own life. And from there on, we slowly get to recognize the powers that exist outside ourselves. And from there on, yeah, it becomes then finally possible to talk about the power of the state, the power of the communities, the power of our families, and the power of blah blah blah. Everything that is not me pertaining to my own self and pertaining to the most basic levels. The power of ideas, the power of hope, the power of blah. Everything else resides in that realm of wow. I have realized actually that I don't have just my own power, but also the power of other things in my hands. That's surprising, but at the same time, it's not utterly transforming for me. Thus far, I think it's hard still to say that we have actually stated anything new at that stage of this. Yeah, sadly, it isn't. It's revisiting the basics, or the basics, sorry. So, inevitably, there is no contribution being stated thus far. What is a very useful thing? I think that the most primal part of this is that, yeah, there through the process of recognition of the different types of power, it is that we also become aware of all those actual, completely distant types of power that are not just so observable. The more we get to understand the power of the things that are closest to us, the more we can also have an easier time dealing with everything that is associated to not just us, but those things that are near us or that are near the things that are near to us and such. It's, let's say it like this, the more I can define anything, the more I can possess the power of knowledge over the things which I see, the more I can further advance my development towards all of those other unconquered areas that also pertain to power. Like, for example, let's say like this. You cannot expect a children who doesn't understand their own state, their own country, what even is a country, to understand that a place where people are being killed every single day just because they're, of their skin color, for example, might not be one of the best countries in existence because they don't possess the frames of reference to compare and contrast the different types of power and why we say that some are appropriate and some are not. In that sense, it's, yeah, more understandable to see that indeed it is in the acquisition of previous levels of structures of power that we can then finally aim towards higher, more elevated, and quote unquote more useful ones. I think I'm not actually forgetting anything at this point. From a basic standpoint, once again, we can. That's the funny thing. We can always, from here on, you have 1,000 types of lines of thinking that allow us to see, to picture, and to try and realize and sort of magnify the existence of power in all of its different and more nuanced forms. But not only that, to do that will sort of defeat the purpose, it's complicated to actually just pick anyone. I guess I I think the most basic one always is something along the lines of what then, tracing back to our initial steps. Here we are doing philosophy. What is philosophy? What can we define then with all of these rules? Unavoidably, there are going to be some sums based on all of the other stuff that we haven't defined as anything that is a science. What are sciences? What do they try to have to exert their power over and what's not? Why do we have the capacity to define sciences as such and understand their power as such? So, in a very rapid, I guess, rapid fire way, let me say it like this. I guess I can even give sort of, I don't think it's exactly comprehensive because it's too much text in terms of how many things are inside of that whole tree or line of subsequent ideas, but it is the order of stuff. Let's say it like this then. Starting from the self, finishing on philosophy. Once we understand the both mental and physical powers, we understand the power of things that we can exert on other things. One of the many ways in which we can exert that power is through the power of the realization of the existence of other stuff. And through those different methods of analysis of that, it is that we realize that there is different modes of exerting our power in itself towards anything that might not be us via not just the basic forms either of physicality or mental representations, but also of the different types of acceptable enough for us modes of harnessing the real world. In one of those many ways, it is that then we come to the conclusion that it might not be as useful as the religious or ceremonial explanations, the scientific one, because it ends up being much better for the sake of possessing a sort of more valid power, and that we say that truly it is the most useful way, the one that seems to possess the most honesty, and and the one that also utilizes the most logical arguments. And inside of all of that, once we start to talk about anything that has to deal with logic, it is that we find ourselves discussing particularly the realm of wow, yeah. And crazily enough, what happens with the things that are logical and convincing and what's not is that all of those things fall under the category, first and foremost, of what is philosophy. And philosophy ends up not being more than just the interest in harnessing the knowledge in itself in its most basic shape. From there on, at the same time, once again, in conversation with the different forms of more defined and more secluded sciences, it is that we acquire the rest of the departments, and that is why, at the same time, philosophy ends up being called the mother of all sciences. Because if it is not true philosophy, we do not get to supposedly develop any other kind of knowledge. So, it is through the interest of harnessing the knowledge of the world in itself that we first and foremost create philosophy, and it is through the necessity to further define everything else in a more appropriate and specific manner that we end up the world is compartmentalizing the different aspects of the knowledge into all of the sciences and making them all work properly towards the different areas of existence. And I guess, I don't know, it isn't 2000, it is along the lines of the current ideas, I think, have been derived from the last 10,000 years or so. If it isn't exactly just from 10,000 years, but supposedly the first mental revolution started with the brain not with the brain, with pen and paper. So that's why we say that since the first 10,000 years that writing as a certain thing has existed, it is that then we start to possess the power over stuff. And yes, in essence, power is not such a noise thing for us until we gain the awareness that we are not just ourselves and we're not just basic animals that are always in conflict with one another, but also that our different types of powers can be can be aimed towards different things and different goals and specific goals that make us happy. And it is also in that equation that we find ourselves amazed by the realization of wow, sometimes I might not be aspiring towards something that I actually want because I am not exerting my power in any way. Something else is exerting its power over my own self, and I am rather just allowing that initial level of power to dictate what I want. So, I guess that's sort of at the same time where I particularly trace the line. I think I have spent at this point an hour or so discussing in its most basic form, power. So I don't think we need to keep on delving on that. But yeah, it's that's why I say once again, it's an eternal back and forth without utilizing any particularly weird term. Yeah, it's an interesting reality that, luckily for us, we can talk out of that and then continue with our normal life, because if we didn't have the possibility to visit any of those initial institutions, then we would also have most probably a harder time trying to visit any other, even more complicated thing aligned to power. Once again, my personal thesis is, yeah, we need to start from the ground. It's sort of impossible to reach the heaven if we haven't built up from the most basic levels. But yeah, also I tried to say it enough times. It's incredibly basic. You have to keep on exploring to see how much power can become such a thing. I think there wasn't any kind of explanation of things like will to power and such, and for example, any Nietzschean concept of not just the once again, not just the will, the power, the different types of will, the powers, and for example, discursive power, coercive power, all that has to do with sociology in itself, and the different structures of power, and what is it, juridical power, and whatnot. So yeah, sadly, those things will occupy way too much time, and at the same time, even if they sound and even if the words themselves make sense, it doesn't mean that we actually understand the idea. In some cases, let's say like this, juridical power, for example, is easy to define in terms of, oh yeah, juridical power is the one that gets to dictate the rules, and is the one that gets to dictate also how the rest of the state orders itself around any nation. Wow, incredibly easy. Now, what the fuck is is a law? Why is this particular power able to exist? And all of those other questions go completely unanswered by the basic definition. But once again, if it is because of text, we can give basic definitions to many things. They might not actually fulfill any other role besides the layer one of giving us a text definition that we can parrot. But at least, once again, yeah, that's the power of convincement that we have over others. You own that's the reality of for example, any kind of exam. You know how to recite that without understanding what you are actually saying, and you can still get a sufficient note to pass a passing grade. Why? Because it's not actually wrong, so it's sufficient. But do we actually understand about what we are talking about or not? That's a different question. That's a different type of power. So, anyways, that's that for that. I guess. Let me drink something. I don't think I actually should try to take in itself a break to an idle break. Let's say once again. I don't think that's necessary. But I think that what would be a good idea is to actually get something like a stretch or such. Mostly also because sadly, in a most basic sense, out of these discussions about let me transition to the other scene. Yeah, a sort of implicit break. No, I don't think I will actually shut up, but it's that these ideas, even if they are basic, they are also complicated because they enter into the realm of wordplays and such, and sometimes even if they do have an actual, so to speak, consequence in existence, once you get to understand their powers and whatnot, what I already defined, you get to understand power, you get to understand how you exert yourself in the world, how things are being exerted on you and whatnot. Even if that is true, it doesn't mean that it's incredibly repetitive. We can, yeah, use a bigger variety of words, but at the same time, it's not such a necessity in this case, or such an obligation to begin with anything. So, yeah, it's still tiresome. And more than anything else, I guess, in that more primal sense, not demanding, but rather mind occupying, I guess, something along those lines. But yeah, the point is to properly progress towards anything else, it's still necessary to actually take a second, calm down, refocus, look towards what we have already done, where is it that we're going now, and if there is no pause between things, then no job gets properly done, you know? But, anyways, I think, yeah, we're almost fine. I am also, personally, I am trying to avoid getting a cramp in the middle of this. I don't want to have to suffer through that. I don't think I can't endure it. It's not like I never in my whole life had a cramp before, so if I have one, I will die. No, but it's along the lines of, yeah, it's sort of unpleasant, to have to suffer something like that. So better to deal with that issue in the moment than to deal with that issue once it actually erupts into a problem. It's more of a preventing the issue itself or the further level of the issue from happening rather than just mindlessly continuing towards anything else because we are rushing stuff. That's, I guess, no, personally, the way to perceive that, yeah, sometimes we like to rush stuff, even if it isn't a necessity to do that. We still do it for the sake of, no idea, not spending so much time on what seems to be not important and such. But, anyways, I think, yeah, we are done. Okay, here we are. It wasn't an actual break, but yeah, as I said before, it's a pseudo break to mostly recalibrate, I guess. Mentally recalibrate, if not physically, not digitally, mentally recalibrate and such. So, anyways, continuing. We have now this one is a lot more personal. This one is a lot more I wouldn't say intimate. I think it's more along the lines of complicated, certainly, but a lot more. Yeah, in the sense of personal, it's a lot more subjective. That's the word. It's not along the lines of intimacy, but it's along the lines of recognizing that, yeah, I guess we still have way too many postures about that around the world, so it's impossible to not, in topics like this one, have moral judgments that are mostly pertaining to our own quality as human beings and not actually objective statements. So, yes, it is a subjective conclusion more than anything else. So, I guess that those are my precautions when explaining that and when stating that. So, after that has been said, has been clarified, we can then, yes, if it hasn't been repeated enough, what we're going to be talking about right now is drugs. So yeah, thank you. Uh, it's not actually complicated. It's just something funny because you don't actually see that many people talking about them. And yeah, personally, I think they are funny. I guess we there are 1,000 different types of ways to reach the previous idea and the current one, but at the same time, I don't actually want to do that. I don't want to see them as something just pertaining to different structures of power. I think, yeah, we have the most basic level of, I guess, the different countries have made them look like something bad. The capacity still to obtain them resides in the hands of the civilians, even if it might be illegal, because somehow we have created big enough black markets nowadays that we can trade all of that stuff between ourselves, even if they are classified as dangerous for the health and what's not. But also, that invites, for example, into the conversation stuff like, oh, yeah, how drugs have become such a weird thing in our culture because they are being given this status of just a thing for the rich, or certain types only are accessible for the rich, while nothing else is. No, it's not a necessary analysis, that one. What we do have is everything else along the lines of, wow, you know what we can identify, and that is that drugs are accessible more now than ever to anyone, and it's quite possible to test them. Let's say it like this. It is personally, I still think it's weird to see how little people have any kind of intrigue towards them. Not because I want everyone to become addicted to anything. My point is not to actually have a civilization with more issues, but at least personally, let me say it like that. Something that I do find funny is how much we seem to have an interest in performing properly, but also how, because we declared drugs in general as a negative thing, we have breached and created a rift between us and those tools that always existed since ancient times as more coping mechanisms and more tools to keep on dealing with reality and sustaining ourselves through time when we have to face reality, and how much, because we separated them at the same time as a consequence, we find ourselves struggling in the modern world. I am not saying, once again, that drugs should be a requirement for anybody's life, but I do think that to some degree, sadly, yeah, it will make a considerable amount of the population a little bit happier. Not also, personally, I don't think that enforcing anything is useful. I wouldn't demand or that correcting the statement that enforcing everything makes things work. So it is in that sense that I don't think that something also more so in this order of any kind of substance that has to deal with so many aspects of our own life isn't so nice, because in what we have gotten to see thus far, what we can at least with enough certainty state is that sadly drugs are far more subjective than what we can in many other cases state, or what some people are capable of accepting, so to speak. Because, for example, it's not the same to drink, to smoke, anything, to smoke any kind of substance, to drink alcohol, to take any kind of pill, even if they are legally available to everyone, and they are obtained through the most legal route. None of those things are the same for those who find themselves in a good and or done from those who find themselves in a bad mental space. This is interesting because, once again, drugs have a lot more to do with ourselves in a personal level than what we can sometimes recognize. And sadly, yeah, the more we reach ourselves from all of those ideas, from all of that side of the world, the more we end up losing the capacity to actually then slowly go back and reconnect, sort of. But still, sadly, it has come from a good enough side. The alienation that we created amongst ourselves, or ourselves from all of those things. Because personally, let's say like this one is quite easier. Sadly, to relinquish power over reality to this external substance, and to relinquish the capacity to deal with the world to something that I consume, does make people feel worse, even if it is helpful for them. There is something in the lines of, yeah, I am diminishing myself, I am ridiculing myself, I am making a fool out of myself, or I am not capable of enduring the world like those tough human beings who don't need to consume anything to have a nice existence. I am a failure unlike them. So I am so stupid for doing that, and I should go back, look, and realize that, yeah, I should not be consuming anything. I should be clean. Because of those issues, it is that sadly we do have more than enough reasons to not allow any kind of drug. And in the final stage of all of this, sadly, yeah, it serves as one of the main and easiest explanations to give and sort of absorb when talking about also all that has to deal with why they are not so popular right now in such a, let's say like this, post-modernity, or I haven't really found so far if we are still living in post-modernity or post-postmodernity, or which kind of times we are living in right now. But yeah, the point is, in these current times, when we are discussing so much the different types of power, when we are questioning so many things, and when we are revising, revisiting, reanalyzing things from so many places, it makes sense that we have started to value so much our own capacities over things instead of what are the things in themselves otherwise observable as But it doesn't actually mean that drugs still are bad. I wouldn't making the footnote once again, adding that it doesn't mean that I enforce them or that I think they should be enforced. But it's a sad loss that we have added to our life. And I think, let me say it like this, I think it is a negative separation from something that doesn't actually needed to be so distanciated from ourselves. I guess, I don't know, there is something quite horrible about how we also talk about them, particularly in places like this one, in terms of, yeah, sadly, also, we have created quite a lot of distance in regards to, yeah, my drugs are legal, therefore they are good, therefore I am a good person, therefore I am doing good things. Unlike you, who are consuming something that also serves to help yourself, to make yourself feel better, to cope with the world just like me, but because they are illegal, you're a bastard who doesn't understand anything and who is just making it worse for everyone around you. When that is not necessarily the case for everyone and every single situation. The way in which we have allowed morality to enter the discourse of, in this case, I guess, self healing through any kind of consumption, and how we have also allowed the annexation of so many other tools for convincing ourselves and others about ideas makes it quite a sad reality that, yeah, nowadays we don't just talk about drugs, we talk about legal and illegal drugs. And there are further divisions amongst that, like soft and hard drugs, and just engineered natural drugs, and blah blah blah. But the point still remains. We have stages of analysis to continue exerting, and we have still things to keep on observing, but we are, I wouldn't say incapable of doing that. We are just not so aware of them. And sometimes it's quite sad, yeah, to see that it could be much easier for people to keep on existing if we were capable of pointing at things like this one. Because in the end, I don't think that it is all that unhealthy to realize that, yeah, sometimes we all need something that allows us to keep on going. And I would rather have somebody drink something or smoke something than because they need to feel something nice, and due to their necessities in that sense, we have to endure somebody killing somebody else just to get the same release of emotions, you know? I don't think in that sense it's so much of an illogical or impossible to follow argument. I am just trying to frame it from there more than anything else. And more so, not just in the case of the destruction of someone else, sadly, in this whole idea of mental health and whatnot, something that is also a loss of sorts is the inability to discuss healthy styles of consumption about things. Sometimes it can be, once again, useful, but if we only remain in utterly judgmental moods of existence, we might as well not have those capacities. So yeah, I don't know. I don't talk about them as, oh yeah, you know what, we have to take pills, we have to take. I don't think so. But at the same time, I think it is an interesting discussion to have, and I do think that it is something that we should be more capable of observing. Not everyone in every single day needs something like that, but at the same time, it's not like no one ever should utilize anything like that. I I think it's sad that we are losing so much our capacity to ever mention them at all. In the present times, we have allowed ourselves to get censored so much by a completely unobservable something just because we fear saying anything out of line. And not always everything that anyone says is completely irrational. Sometimes we can have sensible realizations about the world. But yeah, I don't know. I think, do I have that much more to add? I don't really, once again, I don't try to have a controversial opinion in that sense. I just try to say that much. That much is understandable. That much is not so complicated. Everything else might be, but not that much. So, yeah, I think we are good with that much. Yeah, so, with that much once again being said, I think that we can say thus far good night. And yeah, thanks for everything. It has been a very good stream. Even if sadly I was incredibly late, I sort of forgot to charge my phone earlier, and also had, I said before, an incredibly long day. So thanks for the patience, thanks for the time, thanks for all. Hope in any way it helped, and yeah, fine. Let's find ourselves next time. I don't know when, but yeah, tomorrow supposedly. I don't even remember what. I think tomorrow is Mahabharata supposedly. So yeah, have a good night, have a good day, have a good life, have a happy life. Stay hydrated, rest, everything. Be responsible, be aware. You exert your power on stuff like that. So yeah,